Yeah, thanks, Courtney. Just double check you can hear me okay?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, great. Yeah, so my name's Andrew McKenna. I lead on product two. Just to clarify, Ben is on product five, which you'll follow me after these slides. So we're just looking to double team this. So as Courtney said, really, there's just a few questions. Sorry, Courtney, if you just move on to the first slide, please. Thanks. Great, thank you. So there's just a few questions that hopefully we'll be able to get that we've got on the screen on the right-hand side here that we're looking to get feedback on. And just so it's clear from the beginning, the type of feedback that we're looking for is obviously on those questions. But if you have anything else at all, either on the specific content of what we're talking about, or even if it's just the general direction of you think where we might be heading, please note that down as well, because we're looking to obviously incorporate as much as we can from stakeholder feedback. And then depending on how we are for time towards the end, I know obviously Ben's got a few slides towards the end of this in product five, but I'll try to answer any questions I can at the end while Ben's talking. And then if not, then I'll make sure that I get back to everyone questions over the next week or so. So if we just move to the next slide, please, Courtney. Great, thanks. So as Courtney said, I lead on product two, which sits within Workstream 1A in the Open Networks project, supported by my colleagues across DNOs and ESO. On the left-hand side there, the background to this product, which I suspect most of you will be familiar with already, is that we are looking to identify within the procurement cycle of DNO flexibility what's been done well so far that can be rolled out across other DNOs, and then what's really been missed by all of us that we can look to build on our existing processes and systems that we look to build on towards the end of this year, and obviously moving forward into 2021. So the product itself is a follow-on from much of the work done in previous years in 2018, 2019, where we created the basis of consistent flexibility products, which are now being used across DNOs, as well as from a more high-level point of view, noting down some of the kind of guiding principles from a procurement point of view that we'd be looking to roll out. So we are now at a point of development within this product this year that we could do with a good steer from individuals and companies such as yourself, who we've basically reached out to try and get you on board with this process, as you've all demonstrated capability within the flexibility market space. So you'll all be on the other end of basically of these procurement cycles, and you'll be using it in anger. So it's good to get feedback from yourself, as opposed to the wider stakeholder group, which some have no some have no live interaction with what we're talking about. So that's why we really value your feedback. So if you just move forward, please, Courtney. Great. So this slide here is just an extract from the PID as published at the beginning of the year. And it just highlights basically what we've achieved so far. We've established principles for how flexibility services can be procured alongside from assets connected via A&M systems, and looking at that obviously more holistically, the approach at existing the work that existing processes across DNOs, and establishing strengths and weaknesses with each approach. This includes various milestones that each DNO will go through, kind of touch points with the market, if you like, and identifying the pros and cons of each of the variances, as well as the timelines as well. So some fairly big ranges there across the six of us. So the main deliverables for the remainder of this year build on what we've done to date, really. So first of all, looking at the assessment process companies and assets go through prior to being awarded a flexibility contract. And then second of all, the end-to-end timeline. So basically, what is the value of alignment across DNOs of each of these key milestones? So they're the 2 points I'm really looking to unpick over the next kind of 20 minutes, half an hour or so. So just next slides, please, Courtney. Yeah. So as I mentioned, 2 key areas that I want to present: our thinking, and of course gauge feedback in regard to procurement assessment weightings, and the procurement timelines. So just, and maybe we should have said this at the top, but just where we are in this process is what I'm talking through today is where the product team have come up with. This is our proposal, if you like. This isn't the fixed implementation of this is what's happening. What we're looking to do, any feedback that you have today, as well as the upcoming consultation in the summer as well, we'll be building this into what we're looking to take forward for the rest of the year. So this is our effectively to our kind of minded to position, if you like, that we're taking any feedback on and improving it where possible based on that feedback. So procurement weightings, as I said, so at present, network operators, we use a range of different criteria when we assess and award the flexibility contracts. So the product team have proposed a 4-point assessment that we believe will allow a fair and consistent assessment of assets and the company itself prior to awarding contracts for flexibility services. And then the second point really is, and of course these are interlinked, is the procurement timeline. So the timings of the key checkpoints within the end-to-end procurement system. And this starts from obviously the DNO signposting the network requirement through the tendering process and then the utilisation of the service itself. The product team, again, we propose a timeline that will guide network operators in the procurement cycle, giving stakeholders an increased visibility for key milestones within the process. Just next slide, please, Courtney. Great, thanks. So this slide here presents the case of why we're looking to do something, really. So at present, all DNOs carry out a type of minimal check to assess that all providers are able to provide the minimum elements of the service. So that's to do with the asset itself. Is basically if we are looking for something that it has the absolute minimum criteria, the technical criteria of being able to do that. So although for assets and operators that then pass this assessment, DNOs and the ESO, this is when I'm going to refer to the grid table on the right-hand side. There's a fairly wide range of then how we go about assessing the bids that have made it past this pre-procurement stage. So the range really varies according to kind of cost and then other parameters, which include technical, safety, environmental, kind of managerial structures, things like that. So for operators that have multiple assets and multiple network operators patches, they could be forgiven for getting frustrated at the completely different assessment criteria. So, for example, if it was an SSE and a UKPN, there's fairly wide range there, and I'm just referring to this grid table here. There's a fairly wide range of how your asset would be commercially assessed when bidding in. And it could result in some cases of not receiving a contract. So what this is really trying to do is align these as much as possible to make sure that, so basically 2 key points. First is that the assessment is fair and all asset operators get a decent crack of the whip of providing the DNO services. And then the second is for DNOs to kind of sit among themselves, if you like, and agree a standardised procurement weighting that we can then roll out and they're all happy with from a commercial side. So as I said, these range, the existing criteria range quite heavily, some on technical aspects within the flexibility service through to 100% focusing on price with the assumption, of course, that the technical elements are covered off in the pre-procurement stage. So if anything, this just really sets the scene of why we're looking to do something, why we see this as a key focus for this year. So we just move on to the next slide, please, Courtney. Great, thanks. So as I said, what we've developed is a 4-point assessment criteria, and this is not particularly rocket science. So none of this will be complex or too detailed in any way for the types of service that we're looking to do. What it simply is, it's broken down to 2 stage gates. There's a pre-procurement and then a procurement stage. So just running through, I won't read this table out because I'm sure you're all capable of reading it, but the running through the highlights of it. So you've got the commercial assessment at the pre-procurement stage, which I'll talk briefly on the other slide. And then this is basically just to mainly assess whether or not the company is of good standing, and it's the type of company that we as a DNO would like to get into a contract with. The second assessment is a technical assessment of the asset that is being bid. Now, this is where collaboration with the other Open Networks projects comes into play, as these minimum criteria will be produced by the outputs of Workstream 1A Product 3, which my colleague Lois Clark is leading on. So to be clear, these are simply the minimum criteria. So these may include parameters such as response time, the type of metering, compliance with the necessary grid codes, and of course, that the asset is situated on the correct location of the network as well, that it can provide the service, whether that be geographic or at the correct voltage level. So it's important to note that these first two stages are pass-fail. So there's no waiting that the bids will be awarded on that. Simply, if you pass, obviously you make it into the next stage, which is the procurement stage. And if you fail, of course, then for good reason, then you'll be not eligible to participate in the procurement window. So the third stages and the fourth stages, so the commercial score, that is simply the utilisation of the economic valuation tool, which is going to be produced through Workstream 1A Product 1, hopefully later this summer. And we're allocating a weighting of 70%, a proposed weighting of 70% on that. And then finally, we look onto the technical element in the procurement stage. So this looks at the technical capability of the asset above the minimum criteria set out in Workstream 1A Product 3. So it's assumed that if you make it into the procurement window, the asset has all the minimum criteria that they can provide some sort of service related to what we want as a DNO. But obviously there'll be different types of assets with different capability that can provide better and worse above that minimum benchmark. So what this really looks at is how effective the asset will be in alleviating the constraint. Does it cause any other issues on the network when providing the service, whether that be to the DNO or the ESO, and as well as the type of connection it may have as well. So there's just a small handful of the types of parameters that we include within that assessment. And if you just go to the next slide, please, Courtney. Thank you. As I said, I've just quickly referenced this slide, which is the commercial assessment of the contracting company, which is the stage one. Now, much of this is similar to how we would go about assessing any supplier, whether it be for selling us transformers or office furniture. It really doesn't make a difference. What we're really looking to make sure here is that the company that we're contracting with is of good commercial, ethical, and legal standing. So I suspect a lot of the companies that are bidding into providers with flexibility services, they will have similar assessment tick box exercises and a number of different these contracts. So I don't suspect this will be new to anybody. Just next slide, please, Courtney. Thank you. So then we look at how these assessment windows fit into our procurement timeline, and this is where we merge. So I talked at the beginning there, we've got kind of two key points. We've got the assessment windows, and then of course we've got the timeline. So this is where they merge together. So it's proposed that within this piece of work that we're doing, that there's going to be alignment across the DNOs where possible of the key milestones within each of the procurement cycles, and we're looking to go up to potentially 2 cycles per year. This strikes the balance or we believe this strikes the balance of not overloading the flexibility market with information, and ensures that new, and as well as that, it ensures that new constraints can that may arise on our networks, they are then communicated to the market as soon as practically possible. Now, of course, when I point out here that these are two cycles, these are guidelines at the moment. If we have so every 6 months, let's say, that could potentially mean that we have a 5-month window before a network constraint is identified and it's communicated to the market. We would obviously look to best optimize it best we could that would fit into one of those windows. But if we saw there was market value in hosting a one-off event, if you like, for that particular constraint, then that may be something that a DNO might go to choose. So these are just very much lines in the sand, really, of some form of alignment across DNOs. And then I'll just talk through each of the relevant stages in a slide or two. But for now, I just want to draw attention to a key element that we're looking to get steered on, which is in the next slide. Please, Courtney. Great, thank you. So, as I said, so we've previously mentioned obviously the 4 assessment windows and the pros and cons of whereabouts in the timeline that these should take place. Now, we've as a product team, we've outlined 2 approaches, approach A and B, that we would appreciate thoughts on, and which I've obviously contained within these questions as well on the right hand side. So as we would like to hear from the provider, so you guys in the call, basically what's best for you, and it may well be that it's not option A or B and it's option C that we don't have up on the screen here that's not been thought of. So really, any thoughts on these at all? And the main differences between the options really are option A effectively has the PQQ technical assessment. So that's back to the point of, does the asset meet the minimum criteria as set out in Workstream 1A Product 3 prior to the tender taking place? So the advantage of this approach is that the providers will know prior to signing up to the tender if their asset meets the minimum criteria set out, and then they know whether or not they'll be allowed to bid into the auction. The disadvantage of this, of course, is that the approach creates another point in which providers need to fill out an assessment, which I'm conscious of may create more work for some of you. So there's pros and cons of each approach. I fully get that. And if we just move on to the next slide, please, Courtney. These are I've tried to illustrate this within a timeline. You can probably guess from this slide that my PowerPoint skills aren't up to scratch, but this is what we have. So this is really on the outlining the 2 different cycles. So we have an autumn tender, a spring tender, and we then have the small box in the middle there outlines where each the proposed, so ACA, so assessment criteria A or assessment criteria B, is where the assessment windows would occur under each A or B. So as you can see, the main difference really is where the PQQ technical assessment, so that's stage 2, where that occurs. So whether that's prior to the tender or following the tender taking place. So that gets kind of in option B, that gets bunched in with the procurement side of things as well. So the timeline as a whole works in reverse really. So obviously you've got on the right hand side, you've got 0 months, and that's at the point of delivery. We then look to work back from that in terms of when we look to execute contracts, close tenders, publish the firm requirements, and then of course the signposting requirements as well. Now, one of the key points that we try to another balance that we try to strike really is the publication of network information as far advanced as possible to allow providers or even merchant providers, those aggregators that are looking to source assets on our network at a particular location, to give them sufficient time to do that exercise. Now, it really is a fine balance to strike as the further as the closer we get to a point of delivery, the increased accuracy we would have over a network constraint. So there is, of course, the danger that if we publish signpost requirements beyond 18 months, 12 to 18 months in advance, then there is a greater chance that the network constraint won't materialise. So this is, or it may materialise, but in a different form, is what we originally indicated. So this is really where we see as the optimal balance between giving stakeholders as much notice as possible with over our network constraints, and giving us DNOs the increased level of certainty that we can provide the network information close enough to the point of that they would actually need it. So just moving on, the next slide, please, Courtney. And I think I'm now nearing to the end, so I'll be looking to hand over to Ben soon. Is the implementation of course of when we're looking to do this. So some, as I'm sure some of you will be involved with, some DNOs are already halfway through various cycles with regard to procuring flexibility across DNOs. So it's proposed that DNOs will be looking to implement outputs of this product as soon as practically possible. So that should go hopefully without saying. There's a couple of caveats to that, of course, is that as the depth of the flexibility market varies widely across DNO and across both networks as well as the country, one barrier to the kind of unilateral implementation of the same weighting criteria is if there's a lack of market liquidity at specific locations. So there may be some instances where we would have tenders or auctions, and we're only receiving a small percentage of what we're actually asking for. So in these instances, the 70-30 split amongst those 4 assessment windows may not be the most optimal solution. However, that's something we'd be looking to carry out an assessment of as and when that happens. Now, of course, all DNOs would be expected to implement the common methodology. If evidence suggests that lack of market liquidity would prove that this is an inefficient option, then existing criteria could be used. But as I said at the bottom there, it's expected that as the market develops, they'll diminish the need for this discrepancy, and all DNOs should be having the same criteria, which would be very helpful to the market indeed. So that's really our thoughts there. The next slide is really just an outline of the questions that I've asked, on which you've had should have on the right hand side of your screen. So what I will do, I'll pause and move over to, or can hand the mic over to Ben, and he can take you through product 5. So thank you for your attention and time.
Hi there, thanks Andrew. So my name is Ben Godfrey, work for Western Power Distribution, and I'm going to take you through now the outputs of Workstream 1A product 5. This was a product coming out of the 2019 Open Networks, which looked to deal with the interaction between A&M and DSO flexibility services. So happy to take questions all the way through that. I think there's a Q&A function within WebEx here, where hopefully if you can navigate yourself to the right area of the program, you can ask a question and we can hopefully provide a bit more detail in answering that question. So if I can ask Courtney to move to the next slide, please. Excellent. So the focus of the Workstream 1A product 5 was around looking at how A&M and DSO flexibility services fit together, and how we can avoid any conflict and perhaps look for a level of co-optimization between the different products. And there were 3 key outputs really for this particular report. So one was a report on the conflict management and co-optimization framework. So this framework looked at the level of information, the detail that would need to be shared between procurers of services and network operators to understand what services might be able to be accommodated within particular network constraints, and where those network constraints might be located. And then this allows a sufficient analysis to be undertaken to be able to determine whether or not there would be any level of conflict between the amount of capacity that can be delivered by the network versus how much capacity might be required to accommodate the particular service being sought in that area. And then once those conflicts have been identified, there's then a series of frameworks, techniques to be able to mitigate that level of conflict, and put things in place to design out or reduce the level of issues and conflict between those services and network accommodation. And then that can help inform whether or not anything else further needs to be done, or whether there might be any impacts on the procurement of services in that area. At the moment, the level of conflict between service accommodation and DNO constraints is very, very low. So there isn't really any inherent issue at the moment, but of course the framework was set up there so that when conflict does start becoming an issue, we've got various different mitigations already in place to be able to help out and improve the situation. The second report was around the stackability of DSO services. So this was really looking at all of the balancing services, ancillary services operated by the ESO, comparing those with the services, the standardized services coming out of open networks that the DSOs are all going to be operating, and look at whether there is any stackability either in adjacent time periods or half hours, or indeed stackability within the same half hour time period. And that review of services shows which products can be combined within the same time periods and which ones can be combined within the adjacent time periods, so that we have a good understanding about where exclusivity of contracts exist. And it also put together some recommendations about how that might be improved, so that the biggest collection of revenue services can be used by flexibility providers. And then thirdly, and this is the main bulk of detail that we're going to be going through in the next few slides, is around the stackability of A&M and flexibility. So there's been plenty of queries about what is A&M, how does that relate to flexibility, and what we've tried to do is explain how A&M is implemented, how it is working currently within the DNOs, how flexibility is implemented and how it's working and operational, and explain if there's any level of conflict between those, and then what we might be doing to solve any of that conflict. Good. So on to the next slide, please. So there's a real substantial difference at the moment between A&M and flexibility in the size and scale of it. So if we look at the data that's collated by ENA every 6 months on flexibility within GB, we can see that as an industry, there's quite a significant amount of A&M or flexible connections that have been accepted and rolled out and connected across the networks. So at the moment, from the end of 2018, we had about 2.5 gigawatts worth of flexible connections, and towards the end of 2019, we had just over 3.1 gigawatts worth of A&M and flexible connections. So quite a significant amount of installed generation is connected behind an A&M scheme, and that really shows it's quite widespread in terms of its adoption. If you then compare that to the table we've got here on DNO flexibility services, we can see that the megawatts contracted at the end of 2018 was 61 or 62 megawatts, and towards the end of 2019 it was almost 160 megawatts. So again, huge differences there between A&M and flexibility. Flexibility is very early in its stage of saturation across the network, whereas A&M is pretty mature. So the amount of crossover between those two different technologies, both A&M and flexibility, is fairly limited in terms of where you'd expect those services to be occurring in both circumstances. So the next slide, we start looking at real detailed characteristics of A&M, and effectively A&M is a real-time operating service. It is embedded in the connection agreement, so it actually limits the network access for that particular user, and sufficient control equipment is installed by the DNO in order to physically manage the connection. And this really reduces the charges and the costs for connecting onto the network that are paid for by the user itself. And that really is distinct from a flexibility service, which doesn't have any direct interaction with the connection agreement. It forms a separate commercial agreement, and the services, the flexibility services themselves, are used to solve network constraints that would normally be paid for by the network operator. And that's a big fundamental difference. A&M, the costs would have to be paid for by the user. Flexibility services, the costs are paid for by the network operator. Network access isn't affected by a flexibility service, so it really is just a commercial mechanism for influencing load behavior for a particular user. The user can disregard that, but they may be subject to the penalties. There's no final cap or restriction on what they can and can't do. There's just a commercial mechanism to try and push people towards the behavior that the network operator wants. And then the last of the two main differences is that A&M is a kind of a participation, a voluntary participation that is chosen by the user when they're first connecting, but it's only really falls onto new users connecting onto the network. Whereas a flexibility service, again, is a voluntary mechanism, can be taken up by anybody who has an existing connection agreement. So it's not just for new users on the network. Any user can participate in flexibility services. Okay, the next slide we go to drills down to the crucial difference and the crucial output from this A&M flexibility work. So A&M connections have a forecasted behavior, an amount of curtailment, and that is provided to the A&M users when they're connecting into the network. So the A&M user themselves will know when curtailment is likely to occur on their connection. And this information can be shared as well with the service procurers. So they should be able to understand whether or not A&M is likely to impact upon the delivery of a flexibility service. And the same is true for the actual flexibility provider themselves. So the flexibility provider, they can review the likelihood of curtailment that they've been given by the network operator, and they can decide from themselves about whether or not there's going to be any likelihood of A&M stopping a flexibility service being delivered. And typically what we're seeing, A&M is for export constraints on the network. Sorry, export constraints on the network for where too much generation is being connected. And we're also seeing that flexibility services are where demand constraints are on the network, where too much demand is being connected. So those two crucial differences mean that for the most part, in fact, for all A&M flexibility services, so far, they're acting for different constraints in different time periods. So there's no inherent reason why an A&M user cannot be compensated or provide a flexibility service. And that is a real crucial point. It means that tenders, service arrangements and contracts shouldn't preclude A&M users from providing flexibility services, as there's no inherent reason why they should be prevented or forbidden from accessing those. It's more than likely that an A&M user will be able to provide a service at different times when they wouldn't be curtailed, and so there should be no requirement for them not to be providing those particular services. And that's something that we've taken forward in the standard terms developed under the open networks. So there's no exclusivity clauses pertaining to A&M connections. A&M connections are free to offer DSO flexibility services. and we believe that sufficient information is available for any service procurer to take a view on whether the A&M is likely to have an impact on service provision. If we can just have a look at the last slide here. This details a little bit about the previous work that we've done through Open Networks. So critical point, user information, all A&M constraint information should now be standardized, and the same sort of information should be provided to all A&M users. And this can be taken and used to inform when they think curtailment is likely to occur and help warranty whether it can or cannot provide that particular flexibility service. In terms of procurement, we've talked here about Workstream 1A P2 from last year. There's procurement recommendations about how you assess probability of curtailment within service windows and ensuring that there isn't going to be any clash. So procurement should be aligned to that. And then finally, from this bit of work, the Workstream 1A P5, there is a conflict management framework which gives a process for identifying when conflicts are likely to occur. And consequently, if there is no likelihood for conflict, then there should be no reason why that A&M user wouldn't be able to provide flexibility services. So that's all the work that's done so far, quite a big volume of work delivered under Open Networks to be able to inform A&M and flexibility services. But there is some potential future work as well. So certainly we see that there is an area for non-DSO services to take forward some of this work. If there's sufficient data on curtailment and flexibility services, these can be flow into non-DSO owned platforms, and they might be able to help out peer-to-peer trading or capacity trading requirements and start looking at some of those missing markets that might be able to help provide value to capacity from different users of the system. And then another element of potential future work to be considered for next year under Open Networks would be the standardization of A&M to flexibility services. So there's a number of pathways where A&M users can what they can do with their existing A&M connections. It could be that if you're not able to deliver all the services that you want to on your existing A&M connection because of curtailment or something like that, you can always terminate your existing connection and reapply for a new connection, and you can pay for the associated costs. Or you might be happy just to continue with the existing A&M terms and conditions and just use the capacity afforded to you through the A&M system. Or it may be that as DNOs start looking and providing more flexibility services on the network, there is the option for A&M users to better secure their capacity through interaction with the DNO, so looking to piggyback on some of the DSO flexibility services, or trading with those peer-to-peer markets as we discussed in the non-DSO services. So if you had an A&M connection, you thought you might have some level of curtailment, but you wanted to try and secure your capacity, perhaps you can procure some flexibility from the market, either through the DNO or from a peer-to-peer or non-DSO market, and that would be able to secure your capacity to deliver whatever services you might need to do. And then finally, there might be a longer term conversion to an unconstrained connection by approaching the DNO, seeing what sort of flexibility services they have at the moment into the future, and working through some methodology to be able to use that to best secure your connection from now and into the future. So there's a number of different pathways that might be available to A&M users, and I think there's some further work there for exploring how those might work and drawn some good or best practice out from those particular elements. So that was a quick canter through some of the work that we've done on A&M flexibility services. Happy to take any questions, or I'll have a look to see what may have come my way so far.
It's Andrew McKenna here again. What I'll do is I'll just conscious that I never ran through the questions. I just had them up on the screen, so I'll just quickly run through these, and these are obviously relevant to the product too. And then what I'll also say is that these slides will be circulated hopefully this afternoon, and we'll give one week to accept any feedback or comments that you have in anything. So that should hopefully, obviously we're putting you on the spot here a little bit with presenting our findings and then with following questions. So any comments that you have today, please stick them in the Q&A now. But at the same time, we'll obviously accept any comments back by next Tuesday. So the questions on the screen that I've got for the webinar for product 2 is: would you support the implementation of the timeline across DNOs? As I outlined earlier, do you support the alignment of milestones, and what are the priority milestones within the timeline that should be considered for conversions? So if there's an element that not all the milestones can be converged upon, what do you see as the priority? Question 3: how are you with the timings of each of the key milestones sufficient to allow you to participate in either the e-auction or the tender? So basically, are you comfortable from a business processes point of view that this gives you sufficient time, or perhaps gives you too much time to participate in some of the auctions? Question 4: would you see greater value in holding the PQQ stages at points A or points B? So that's basically just talking about the two different options that we considered. So again, we'd really appreciate your feedback in that one, because we're really looking for a definitive A or B on that one, as opposed to simply a steer of what we're already going for. Question number 5: what are your views on the technical parameters set out that will contribute towards the technical weighting of the procurement stage? And question number 6: do you see value in network operators aligning, and how flexibility providers are assessed? So they're the 6 questions that I've outlined. Again, as I've said, we'll take any feedback back from you over the course of the next week. But please jot down any initial thoughts into the Q&A box at the moment.
And we have received a question from Fiona for Ben, which is in the chat, if you'd like to have a look, Ben.
Yes, I just saw that. So yeah, a question from Fiona. Is worth noting that in the A&M characteristics that A&M in some cases can remove the ability to stack provision of flex services to the ESO. So exactly, Fiona, this is sort of one of the critical points about A&M, is that it doesn't provide unconstrained capacity 24/7 365 like the other connections do. There is some limitations to the capacity, and should curtailment on an A&M connection be for the same time periods as when an ESO service is looking to be delivered, then there may be some knock-on impact and some potential conflict. But conversely, the curtailment information about those A&M zones is available. All the users, A&M users, have that information, so they should be able to. You as a user should be able to take a view of whether your service is going to be impacted, or your potential to deliver a service for the ESO will be impacted by A&M services, and you can warranty that and decide whether or not to whether you're able to stack those particular services. So it really is a case about making sure that there's sufficient information out there to understand when A&M curtailment is likely and how that fits in with the services that you're looking to stack together and deliver within your portfolio. Good. So I think, as Andrew said, we'll be circulating the slides afterwards, and we're happy to take any sort of further questions or further recommendations for development for work, feedback, either via email on the back of those slides, or indeed later on in the year we'll be going out for further consultation on flexibility for some of the elements through a much wider program, and we'd be happy to get some feedback and to help develop some of the further ideas that we might be having.
I do have a couple more questions that are coming through, all of them into the chat function.
Excellent. Okay, I can see one from Graham coming into the Q&A function there. On the point regarding the limitations of A&M, the ability to participate in various ESO and DSO schemes, should there be a regular review of the requirement for A&M in any given area, as there may have been changes in the network? So I think, Graham, that's a good point. A&M might be fit for purpose when the scheme is first developed, but it should be reviewed to make sure that there aren't any changes in network or system configuration or behaviour, so that the A&M scheme itself is perhaps not the most economic thing to do in that particular area. That's something that we're looking under Workstream 1A Product 1 at the moment. So this is a standardisation for looking at the CBA of flexibility services and A&M against conventional reinforcement. One of the things that we're looking to do is through a CBA modelling tool, standardised modelling tool that is being developed under this bit of work, will be to apply it to A&M zones to understand what the likelihood of curtailment is and the expected costs of curtailment, and expect if the costs of curtailment that we saw in that area exceeded particular levels, or were particularly punitive compared to the cost of conventional reinforcement, then that might trigger some pathway to either strategic investment or some other method of augmenting the network to we're doing in terms of investment in the network. So I think that's that'll hopefully be a very good output of Workstream 1A Product 1, will be to have a standardised tool to compare flexibility, A&M, conventional reinforcement, and make sure that we're doing the right things as and when the changes in the system are required.
I've also got a question here from Kevin McDonald. One of the issues I have internally is raising the profile of DSO Flex. Does the ENA have a view on the growth curve in the coming years, like a percentage increase?
So certainly, I guess can speak from a WPD point of view. But the same is true for all of the other network operators as well. We've all committed for the flexibility first commitments, which looks to for all load-related reinforcement across the end of ED1, so that's out to 2023. Has to be tested for flexibility to see whether that could provide a more economic solution. If you look at the amount of load-related reinforcement that DNOs undertake, that's in the region of about £300 million per year. So you'd expect that the opportunity for flexibility could be to defer that £300 million per year from now and for the next few years out to the end of ED1. So certainly the growth of flexibility is on the upward trend, and I suppose the other thing to point towards would be the E&A flexibility in GP webpage, which has some growth figures there for how much volume of flexibility the DNOs are expecting to seek over the next year. Again, there's a significant growth from year on year in what we're expecting for flexibility. So if you're trying to build a business case, certainly look at the E&A flexibility in GB webpage, and that should give you some figures on what the future for flexibility is.
And I've also got a question from Ryan. Currently, units connected to distribution networks, traditional connections, can be providing services to the SO, for example, BM, and can be disconnected with no prior notice from the DNO network for any period of time with no compensation. Is this something which is being looked at by the project?
So certainly the rights that different users have on in terms of security on the network, it's something that we've been considering as an impact on all of the open networks work, but I think the decision and the materiality of that is actually much greatly affected by the significant code review that's going on at the moment. So the network access and forward-looking charges review, then that will decide later on in the year on a kind of minded to position, and that will really inform the security and the contribution security for different users across the network. And so I think that will have the biggest level of materiality. Then once that baseline has been set, then I'm sure there'll be plenty of work for open networks to decide how we move from where we are today to where we might need to be in the future based on that outcome. Good. Just having a look. I think we're running towards the end of our time slot now. I think that is all the questions that we've been asked so far answered. But as I said before, happy to take any by email or off the back of the slides that we send out later on. But I suppose I would just like to thank you for your attendance today. Good to see that hopefully some of our outputs are being used in anger within the industry, and we'd be very keen to sort of seek future views on where some of this work should be heading and how we might best use it in terms of implementation across the network. So is that anything else for you, Andrew, or should we bid our webinar attendees goodbye and take an action to seek any feedback later on?
Yeah, I agree, Ben. Just to echo Ben's comments, thanks for everyone joining and your attention. And yeah, just please reply. We'll send out these slides this afternoon, and please get back in any points or questions that you may have. But thanks again.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time.